join as we go along. And if people have questions as we go, we have a chat box that you can put those questions in.
Great.
So welcome everyone to this webinar. It's a webinar about, as you can see on your screen, how community-based research theory is put into practice, developing a co-curricular research shop model. The webinar is brought to you by Community-Based Research Canada, and it is the third of 3 webinars that we are hosting over the course of this summer. Excuse me. We will also host a fall webinar series beginning in September, so watch for information about that as well. My name is Jess Notwell, and I am the CBRC Program Coordinator, and I'll be the moderator for today's session, but of course CA will be the star. So I'll just tell you a tiny bit about Community-Based Research Canada for people who don't know. Our mission is to address real societal problems through research as the national champion and facilitator for community-based research and community campus engagement in Canada. And so these webinars are part of promoting research that centers around community campus engagement and that really centers around community ultimate. For 10 years, CBRC has brought together key players of community campus partnerships, and our network builds capacity for academia to engage with the broader community and to collaborate and use research as a tool to mobilize community action. So that tells you a little bit about us. And before we actually start with the webinar, I will just tell people that the way that we accept questions at the end of the webinar is in the chat box that you will see on your screen below. And so what we ask people is, you don't have to wait till the end. Any moment you think of a question for CA during the course of the webinar, please share it in the chat box, and we will gather all of those questions, and then we will draw from those and have a question and answer period with CA at the end of the session. And we will make sure that we go through as many of those questions as possible when we have that conversation. But we don't want you to think, oh, I had a great question, and then forget it. So please feel free to fill those in at any point. And then during the question and answer period, I will share those with CA or ask them sort of as an interview style model. Yes. Okay, great. And so the question and answer period will take place for about 15 minutes toward the end of the webinar, just before we ask for your feedback. And so now what I would like to do is introduce our presenter. So we're really lucky today to have CA Klassen with us presenting this webinar. And I'll just read CA's bio, and I haven't memorized it, so I'm actually going to read it. So CA is a settler born and raised on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, currently known as Hamilton, protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. After completing a Bachelor of Music and Jazz Performance, they lived in Victoria and then Montreal before earning an MSc in Social and Economic Policy and Planning with a Community Development specialization at the University of Toronto in 2010. Since then, they've worked in community-based research in Hamilton in various capacities with community, nonprofit, academic, and government stakeholders. They started their current role as the Community-Based Research Coordinator at McMaster University's Office of Community Engagement in January of this year, where they oversee the research shop and support community campus connections around research. They are involved in the 2S LGBTQ+ organizing in Hamilton and are a member of the Hamilton Public Library Board. So we're really fortunate that CA is presenting this webinar today. I think we all have a lot to learn. Welcome, CA, and the floor is yours.
Great, thanks so much, Jess. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's an honor, and I hope it's useful for folks. I'm certainly very keen to. The question part is always my favorite, just because then I can have a sense of what is interesting to folks or what, what's useful, what we can kind of bounce back and forth between us. But I appreciate that I'll need to say some things in order for folks to have questions about that. So I will do my part, and I will especially look forward to the part where we get to have a bit more of a dialogue, less of me just being the star of the show, although part of me loves that. So thanks so much for this opportunity, as I say, and yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of context of the research shop, yeah, in a few different ways, and then I'll talk about more particular things about how we've been operating and yeah, what the ways are that we've been getting information about what changes we might make to our model. You know, it's sort of a community-based research project in and of itself, so I will do the methods section, and then really focus on outcomes. Sort of these are some decisions that we have made and that we're testing as we go. Yeah, so that's the sort of overview. I'm gonna have to flip back and forth just to see which slide you're on. So maybe yes, you can advance to the next slide, please. Oh yes, context. Here we are, and then the next one, please. So first, I just want to say something about science shops in general, which is what the research shop is modeled on. So these have existed in several European countries for about 40 years. Started in the 1970s with from faculty members really saying we want to direct our research to community groups and to community concerns to benefit community, and not sort of hoard academic institutional resources around research, around education, knowledge creation, to our own purposes. But we want to actually have this be in connection, relationship with our communities. And so from the literature, we know that the main impacts that collaboration with research shops has on some of the community organizations that participate are things like improved access to research resources, particularly for more marginalized groups who may not have access to academic journals, for example, which are typically subscription-based and so have that paywall. Groups also get a more realistic understanding of the value of research and how research can be used to meet their objectives, or sort of, yeah, whether it's providing particular services or understanding how to make a case for funding to support what they're doing. Improved capacity often, and that research shops are generally perceived by community organizations as an efficient means of connecting universities and communities. So my role right now, I'm in the Office of Community Engagement, and our really is building bridges between community and campus partners through all sorts of different things, and that includes community groups wanting to connect with the university and faculty and students, and staff, as well as folks on campus wanting to connect with communities. We do that in a few different ways, and so my piece of that is really focused on research, so community-based research as a whole, and then one of the pieces of my role is to oversee our research shop. Collaboration with research shops also allows community organizations to be aware of the possibilities and limits of research. So that's definitely part of the work that we do, is about really trying to scope questions that are researchable within the time we have, and sort of supporting community groups in developing their own capacity for how to frame their questions, or how to land on questions that are going to get them something useful at the end, but also that are going to be researchable by the teams. And can you go to the next slide? And so there are a few drivers. Here's a funny dog driving a car, just because I like to laugh at things. But there are a few drivers that are sort of shaping the context that the McMaster Research Shop finds its in. And there are lots of drivers, but I'm going to talk about three main ones. One being funding cuts to post-secondary institutions. So the 2019 provincial budget saying that Ontario will become a national leader in outcomes-based funding. And so right now, outcomes-based funding is part of how universities are funded. It accounts for a very small percentage of their funding at present, I think around 2.4%. That will increase quite quickly, the proportion of university funding, so that by 2024-25, the outcomes-based funding will actually account for 60% of universities' funding, so that's quite a dramatic shift. And then outcomes that universities will be evaluated on for that funding is also changing. So there will be 10 metrics. We're gaining clarity about what those really mean bit by bit. But it is quite a shift, and so increasingly universities are under pressure to obviously to demonstrate success in terms of these outcomes, and it may mean funding cuts, which will change the environment that, or sort of, it sort of impacts what becomes a priority, what sort of, how lean does any given university need to get given that funding context. So that's one of the things that shapes a program like ours, which is co-curricular, so meaning volunteer. The students and alumni that participate in it don't get paid, nor do they get credit, but they do get some other benefits. Sorry, I just need some water. So that's part of the context is the sort of broader university funding context. Another driver, again, because we are one of these ways that campus and community sort of meet each other and work together, is that community groups that we are partnering with are also in a fairly precarious funding environment where their resources are scarce and often short term. There are often project grants for maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, but core funding for community organizations is very rare, and so that can sort of direct what types of projects get taken up. So I'm speaking in this case of more formalized nonprofit organizations, but we also work with less formal groups. Any group of community members, just can't be an individual in terms of our criteria for participation with the research shop at McMaster, but even so, fewer resources still for less formal groups. And so as they may have questions or are trying to get things off the ground, there's not always a lot of money or human resource really to undertake research projects that might help shape initiatives of various kinds. And then a third, and sort of related to the first in a way, but a third driver I just wanted to touch on is another policy piece, which is really this growing emphasis on experiential learning, experiential education opportunities, and career readiness. I sort of see these things all kind of, coming together in one conversation around the value of post-secondary education, which is very interesting, and I won't really go down the rabbit hole on right now, but sort of are the questions around, are university graduates gaining the skills they need to enter the workforce, or what are the employment outcomes for graduates, and are they getting the skills that they need to navigate some of those things? And so experiential education is increasingly seen as an important component of that. It gets taken up in a lot of different ways depending on who's doing the talking. But so there is a desire from many groups for community engagement, for university courses, and for university students to be engaged in their communities, to have sort of the real world experience. I would argue it's all real, it's all one world, but sort of other immersive experiences and other chances to build relationships and understand how things might work outside of a university context. So those are some of those sort of context pieces that I just wanted to touch on that do have impacts on how we are doing what we're doing and what the questions are that we're trying to find our way through and navigate. So I will please go to the next slide if you would. Thanks. And so I'll just chat about the McMaster Research Shop itself for a moment. So McMaster Research Shop began in Faculty of Social Sciences in 2015 with pretty soft money. So I think there was funding for a 10-hour-a-week coordinator. That person was typically a senior undergrad student, PhD student, but like a very tiny amount of funding. And that person was trying to coordinate multiple projects as they were also carrying out their own research and there was quite a bit of turnover in that role. Nobody stayed longer than a year in the first few years. Then when the faculty member who had started the research shop moved on to another position at another university, the research shop was moved into the Office of Community Engagement. And there was a request to have some support to offer supervision to that. And so over time, the research shop at McMaster has gained a little bit of capacity in terms of, so now there's funding for the coordinator position has been 20 hours a week, and some more capacity built in for supervision of that staff person. And then my role, the community-based research coordinator, as Jess mentioned, started in January of 2019. And so part of that role is to oversee the research shop. This role that I'm in is a pilot to sort of test to see what value added is of this kind of role and how it can best add value to stakeholders across the university and community. And so part of what we're trying to do is to look at the research shop and formalize it, really to sort of refine how we're doing things, how we're structuring things, in order to have it be really a high quality program that could be supported and deployed at various levels of investment. Really, I think this is the way we're thinking about our work and how to talk about our work as we are in conversation with senior administration about the value of it in the university. So through some of that, so that my role, as I said, was a pilot, so that was some internal, it's called strategic alignment fund, but sort of internal funding from the university itself. There was also, the shop was also successful in getting some career ready fund money from the province. So again, the career ready being sort of pushed. And so there's been this brief shining bubble of capacity in the research shop, probably the most we've ever seen and probably the most we ever will see. So there's been this opportunity in the last 6 months to really look at our practices and really do some reflection and some data collection, really to have a look at how we're doing what we're doing and how we can strengthen the model in a long-term way. And so really our goal in this has been to redesign the model, as I say, for sustainability and balanced benefits is what I had on my title, which is really about we are trying to find and scope, support research projects that produce something useful for the community partner and also produce quality experiential learning experiences, opportunities for students, and trying to find a balance between those. And sometimes it's a tricky one to strike. And sometimes as we are scoping projects, we direct them to other places that might be a better fit. If we feel like there's sort of this mutual benefit, or rather, if we feel the evenness of mutual benefit may not be present, there could be other avenues that might be more appropriate for some projects. But mutual benefit, I just will say for a moment before I move to our methods, is one of the principles of community engagement that the Office of Community Engagement is founded on, and that we were co-developed with a network of on-campus partners of how, really what the vision is for how McMaster wants to be engaging with community, broadly defined. So there are principles of community engagement, and that really mutual benefit is one of the key ones. And so we try to bring that into our work in the research shop as well. So we'll just move on to the next slide for a moment. So as I said, I will get into the methods of the various places we've collected some information to help us make our decisions. So then the next slide, please. There we go. Oh, I think those were supposed to pop up. Anyway, here we are. Imagine that it was just bees, and then one by one, these 4 bullets kind of popped up. So one of the things that we've done, the bees thing does make sense. I'll get to it later. Don't worry, it's not just a random image. But one of the things that we did was to actually construct a research shop project on the research shop itself. So it's a bit there. So we had a team of students working on it. I supervised the team, and they did a tremendous job, really. I was so grateful for their work. So they reviewed some literature around science shops. They also analyzed and then also collected some new stakeholder feedback, so through surveys and interviews. We regularly do surveys with our volunteers and with community partners as a follow-up when the projects are completed to hear about how those are going. And so they analyzed the data we had collected through the previous couple of semesters, and then also, as I say, did some more interviews with volunteers and some more phone interviews, which were really just administered surveys of the community partner surveys that we've had. So that was one thing. And the primary research question there was really just about what policies and practices should the research shop have in place to effectively provide community partner organizations with useful products and student volunteers with satisfying research experiences. So again, just that balance between the stakeholder groups, sort of, is there mutual benefit, and how do we structure what we are doing to reach the best balance that we can in the sort of most effective way of doing that we can. We also just did a fairly regular research shop team reflection. So as I said, there was a sort of bubble of capacity. So there was myself as the CBR coordinator, and then my colleague, Evan, I think he's on, our research shop coordinator. So he does the day-to-day of the research shop, deals with so many logistics all the time, and absolutely have so much gratitude for his work in this. And then Elise, who was the first coordinator of the research shop when it began in 2015, came back for a short contract to be an advisor, really, so that we could draw on their institutional memory, so that as I came up with all sorts of bright ideas of how I should maybe change it, I would hear them, yeah, we tried that and actually it didn't work, so we could avoid duplicating too many of the mistakes, hopefully, that had been made. In any case, so we reflected on the report from the students themselves, and then also just our own experiences of what the particular challenges were. We've also had I've had a great time consulting with our colleagues in Guelph, who run their research shop at CESI, the Community Engaged, CESI. I'm so sorry, Guelph. We've had great conversations with them, and in fact, we did a sort of more formal consultation with them about some of the thornier issues that I'll get into later to sort of get their feedback, and it's just been invaluable to hear from them. And part of what we've learned, I'll get to this later, but part of what we've learned is really that the way our shops are positioned institutionally actually has quite a bit of influence on what our challenges are and how we can deal with them. But in any case, they've been operating for a while. It's been a tremendous resource. And then we did a hive mind, where the bees come in, where we brought all of the Office of Community Engagement staff together for a couple of hours, and tried to, had a structured process, talk through some of the trickier things that sort of we're thinking about this idea, but we don't really know what might we be missing. So those are some of the sources of the data that we're chewing on to inform what we're going to do. So I will move on to talk about the outcomes, and I've split this up into two sections. And so the next slide, perfect, great, thanks. So clear model decisions. In case you're wondering, that's a jellyfish in shallow water. So it's like these two layers of clarity. Anyway, once I found that, I just sort of got lost in how clear and beautiful it was. I hope you're enjoying it. So, from all of these various consultation sources and data sources, some things were quite clear and easy to decide about how we're going to adjust our model. So I'll walk through some of those quickly, and then have some time for the thornier issues that are just messy. And anyway, so some things that are clear, we really need to manage the number of projects very closely. So part of what happened was that On the first day that I came into the office in January in my role, we had a sort of team orientation session in the morning, and then in the afternoon, we met as a research shop team to decide which projects we were going to take on for the semester, just because of how the flow chart and timeline needs to operate for the research shop. That I came in at the beginning of the semester, so we really needed to get going to lock in what those projects were going to be, so that we could know how many students we needed to recruit and so forth. Really get the ball rolling on some of those. And so, we took a guess at what we could handle, and certainly we're all still standing, but 12 was too many projects, actually. We've now landed on 5 or 6 with the part-time coordinator, so with 20-hour-week coordinator. That's our target. And so, yeah, we really got swamped. So Evan was supervising lots of projects. I was supervising several projects, which was very helpful for me to get a sense of the day-to-day and what's required in these projects, and sort of navigating all those things. But that was really to immerse me and help me get a good feel for the research shop. But now we're really moving to a model where the roles are much more clearly defined, where Evan really is supervising the team leads. I'm sort of advising him on things, supporting on the sort of more strategic side of things, policy, and supporting, as particular challenges come up, but really not in the weeds too much. So the number of projects is one thing that was very clear. So as I say, we're gonna aim for 5 or 6 in a semester instead of 12. Another one that was fairly easy was that the group of prospective volunteers was not very strictly defined. It was mostly students and some alumni, but we also had a few community members or students from other academic institutions who were volunteering, and certainly had no complaint or particular case against having folks who are not associated with McMaster being involved. But there are a couple of logistical challenges. So one example is accessing library databases. We would go through a process to get a temporary login for folks who didn't have a McMaster ID to access that. So it can be done, but it sort of was time consuming. And then there's sort of argument around that the funding for the research shop, the design of it is to offer co-curricular activities for McMaster resources, and that's sort of the notion that it follows that the benefit of those opportunities should be directed primarily at McMaster students and alumni. So we've narrowed the scope of our volunteers to include students and alumni. Another piece that became really clear is just that it's incredibly important. The scoping of a project is one of the most important that we do. We operate on a semester basis, which is challenging sometimes. This is another area where timelines between the academic institutional priorities and community timelines may not line up. And so we do get requests for projects that could be quite interesting and beneficial to all parties, but the timing doesn't work out. And we so far are committed to staying with the semester-based model, so that just because students, primarily, as I say, most of the volunteers are students, know their schedule is based on a semester, and so the ability to know how much time you can devote to a research job project and when those times might be, when you can meet with your team, is very helpful just to make it go. But scoping a project that can be completed by a team of 3 to 5 students with one team lead, and then we estimate that each volunteer offers 5 hours a week on average to the project. And so trying to get the project to be the right size is a bit tricky, and to clarify with the community partner what would be useful for them. What are they hoping to use the work for? We're always very attentive to that's coming to us with a request, having the ability, commitment to making some kind of change or using the findings in some tangible way, so that there is a very clear application landing place for the deliverable, whether that's Word or other type of product. Part of what we're doing in the scoping process then to make it a little clearer is that we're building in a checkbox to say, do you want recommendations? So sometimes groups do and sometimes they don't, but to actually get very clear about that early on so that we can support and hopefully empower student groups who are carrying out the research to make those recommendations. It seems that sometimes there's a reluctance of sort of saying, well, here are the findings. But we don't know. We don't want to make recommendations. And so part of the project is to support the teams to say, this is what we found based on this data. We would test ABC, knowing that the final decision absolutely rests with the community partner. That influence over what happens next with the findings would vary widely between projects. Anyway, so just to have clarity about that piece. We're also trying to build in a little bit clearer visioning with partners about what success looks like for them to try to help get a really clear idea of what their needs are and what they're hoping to come up with through the end of semester. Part of that is around managing our expectations around subject matter experts. So part of what we do, or like a piece of our model that adds a lot of benefit and sort of learning opportunities for the volunteers, is that we do interdisciplinary teams. So we really try to have folks from health sciences with engineering, with social sciences, with business as much as possible. We don't have even participation across the 6 faculties at McMaster, but we do have representation from all the faculties. So then the way that folks approach a question or problem will be different, and they can learn from each other in that way. There aren't very many opportunities for students to do that in their courses, and so that's part of the benefit of as a co-curricular, we have the flexibility to have folks be interdisciplinary teams. And then sometimes there's a tension with that where community partners sometimes do want a more focused subject expert on a particular topic. And certainly, the students that work with us are excellent, and there may be, so we're just trying to get a clearer idea of that, trying to get a clearer idea of if there are particular disciplines that a community group thinks would be helpful to bring to their question, then we can have that in mind as we're forming the teams. But also just trying to make it clear that we offer a different kind of service rather than a particular narrow topic focus, and that if that's really what they're needing, that there might be another way to connect them when else at the university, which is where we get into pathways to connect potentially to courses in a particular discipline or to faculty research if there's a fit there. We're also trying to scope projects to be a little bit smaller to facilitate finishing them on within a semester. So we always have this target of finishing them within a semester. Generally that happens, but they do spill over sometimes into the next semester. And certainly they have this semester with so many projects. So trying to scale back a little bit on just on the whole scope of the project in order to support that is something that we're doing. A couple of things that are also quite clear around volunteer recruitment. So as I said, the interdisciplinary teams are quite important. So we're going to continue practices where volunteers get to rank their preferences of projects. But that's something we hear quite clearly that engages people and keeps them engaged is when they are interested in a given project. So having that flexibility in there is important. We're going to strengthen our outreach across faculties to facilitate those interdisciplinary teams. And that we're also just getting a bit more systematic in the materials that we send to volunteers so that they have as much clarity as possible. We have a memorandum of understanding now for both community partners and volunteers to just say, these are the things we're expecting, these are the things you're agreeing to, ways this legally binding contract, but to just actually get on the literal same page to say, this is the type of partnership we're entering. And to include links to old reports so they have a sense of what they're sort of looking towards. So that's one piece. And then another just very simple change that we're making is that we're going to be using some project management software or templates. That's part of what we're navigating, is exactly where we're going to land on that. But trying to have something that's low barrier, sort of very user friendly, leaning towards probably using just the Excel online, or since we're only working with folks who will have a Mac ID, McMaster ID, then the Office 365 subscription that Mac already has can be used, so that it becomes a shareable web spreadsheet, but then it has a bit better data security than some other things. But yeah, just with clearer templates to structure the process, so that we don't have things. So those are the sort of simpler ones, and then I'll just ask you to go, Jess, please, to the next. So the thornier issues, yeah, are also several. and a lot of them sort of have to do with, well, several of them have to do with funding, as I've mentioned a few times here, but also sort of how we're positioned within the university. And maybe I actually haven't made that clear, so I'll just take a second to say, so the Office of Community Engagement is a central unit. We report to the Vice Provost faculty and then the Provost above them. So we're not in one of the faculties, but that we are supported financially by faculty. So each faculty contributes, how much funding to the central pot, and then it flows to us. And that we work to support all of the faculty in whatever it is they're doing around community engagement. Lots of folks have been doing community engagement for a long time before our office was created, and we absolutely recognize that. And just work to position ourselves to support or enhance or connect further, or so whatever the needs are at each faculty is how we try to our work to meet those as best as we can, recognizing that they will likely be quite different across faculties. So that's just the sort of contextual piece I probably should have started with. But so in the thornier issues that we're chewing through right now with the research shop model itself are, one is about paying our volunteers. So we don't have resources to pay all of the research associates and team leads right now. We do have a small amount of resources to pilot paying team leads, and then we're in conversation right now to see if we can attract some other supports to pilot that for the academic year and see how that goes. But that the notion there is sort of like to try to support and facilitate consistent, high quality, timely deliverables. There was, among the stakeholders we spoke with around this idea, there was general support, but with some qualifications. And so the advice that we got was really to make sure that we have very considered and transparent communication, given that in this model, research assistants would still be volunteers and the team would now be paid, and so there's a difference there. The duties of those roles are different, but that just to be upfront and clear about that and why it's happening and what we're hoping to learn and all the rest, and trying to just to scope the duties of those roles quite carefully and have boundaries. So we are planning to launch this pilot in the fall, all things going well. And this does shift the sort of administrative and supervision requirements for our staff team, as well as the team leads move from volunteers to employees. So that's one of the kind of messier issues. Another is how to encourage participation across all faculties. So the thing I was speaking about just a moment ago, that this institutional context really matters quite a bit. That different research shops in different universities, because they are structured differently, just different, have just different stakeholders that they need to answer to. And so because our program, as I mentioned, is funded by all faculties and we need to show value, we are consulting we are beginning a consultation process with senior administrators in each faculty about how this role of the community-based research coordinator and also the research shop can best meet their needs. And so it may be that there is actually a different sort of strategy or angle or outreach method or what have you, depending on what we hear in those conversations. But really trying to have broad participation, recognizing that some disciplines are going to have more experience and training in the types of projects that we get here in the shop. That part of what we're offering is a learning opportunity, not just interdisciplinary, but also these professional skills around project management, around plain language writing. We're also working on redesigning how we train our volunteers. So we have in the past done a few workshops each semester, and the content is quite strong, and the folks who find it very beneficial, but it's very difficult to get a lot of folks out. And it's a volunteer opportunity, you know, so this is another time ask on top of folks' busy schedules and often conflicts with classes or work or other responsibilities. We thought of possibly doing an all-day training on Saturday early in the semester, and heard that that might not be the greatest idea, that might actually be more difficult to schedule if folks have childcare responsibilities, have work, and all day might be a big ask. And so our plan for the fall is to have our initial required orientation sessions, and then some method specific material sent out to the teams in advance for them to read, and then the coordinator Evan will be going to those teams themselves to do a more hands-on sort of role playing or other type of workshop activity, experiential learning opportunity to to get the teams some practice and some experience, some basic training method as relevant to their project, and just building that into the regular team meetings rather than trying to schedule the 30 volunteers within one slot. Another one that we're trying to work through is how to engage more marginalized groups as the community partners in the research shop projects. One of the other principles of community engagement that we use at the Office of Community Engagement is equity, and part of what we're doing right now is having a look at what that really means, how that plays out in practice. And so having a look at which groups are benefiting from the resources that go into the research shop is something that we are including in our consideration of project requests. So, and that's a tricky one. Like, it's an important one for us to do, but the how becomes more complex. And so I think wisely the advice that we are taking and have heard on this is to not sort of run out and try to, engage directly with a bunch of whatever we perceive to be more marginalized groups, and say, what's your research question? But instead to use the other principles of community engagement that we already use to build relationships slowly over time, through going to events, through, someone said, go and chop carrots, don't have an agenda. So whatever the thing is, to just attend events and to meet folks and work with our existing networks and sitting on boards, sitting on committees, and just really listening and building relationships gradually so that there can be some sort of trust, which takes time to see if there are research questions, and to just communicate clearly and often about what the research shop is and what kinds of things it can offer, but really not to do any kind of hard sell on a research project. Is how we're going to word on that for now. And then two finals that I want to make before we go to questions, although I really should wrap up because I want to hear your questions. One is just about financial sustainability. So right now we're piloting a fee-for-service project where we do have a small service contract with a community partner, hired a paid research assistant to carry out most of the data collection and analysis on that, to see how it goes. Really, there's sort of advantages and disadvantages here. We will evaluate it and see what we learn. So this can be, the pro on this is to say, look, we're bringing in resources from outside of the university to support this initiative. But then there's also concern that may be counter to the notion of our research shops as they originated, being a way to share the resources of the university as a publicly funded institution with the public. The other sort of point against pursuing this model too aggressively is that community-based research sort of is a market that doesn't really need more competition. There are community-based researchers who could be doing these kinds of projects if there is funding to support them, and it may or may not be an appropriate role for a university to be entering that part of the market, the sort of CBR market. And then the final point I'll raise that we're chewing through, and this is a much longer term question, but is exploring the notion of the research shop as a curricular program, so as a course. This is how lots of the science shops in Europe operate, and there certainly is a lot of evidence to suggest that this is a helpful model. There are lots of pros, so financial sustainability, instead of university putting out resources to run a program like this, it then attracts resources through tuition to have something like this. It aligns with the core mandate of education, formalizes the training component, and it has much more structure for the project in terms of semesters, in terms of evaluation quality. Then there are also some cons for sure, and so as experiential learning and community engagement opportunities grow, it would be important to distinguish a niche for a course like this. How is it different than other things that exist already? There's also a concern that we could lose some of the internal motivation and commitment from volunteers. Part of what we've heard is that the folks that work with us really, really care about the project, and so become invested in them in my perception is in a bit of an emotional way, or possibly as some meaning making, some connection to something that feels valuable outside of themselves, some connection to a broader purpose. And I wonder if that would shift if the research works. It can also limit the pool of who can participate. Most of our volunteers are graduate students, and so their course loads are often quite tightly prescribed, and there may not be much flexibility in them, so that could be another issue to consider. And there could be a challenge of how to integrate graduate students and senior undergrads, which currently is our volunteer base primarily. Sort of how does that work if it's a curricular model? Can undergrads and graduate students be taking the same class? So overall, we are formalizing in some ways. We're also sort of testing and continuing to adapt as we go. As I mentioned, my role is a pilot, and we'll continue to reflect on it as we hear from our other partners on and off campus, and we'll continue to make changes to the structure of the research shop itself as we go. But that I'm quite excited about the direction we're headed in. I will stop there, but I do actually really want to hear your questions, and I will thank you so kindly for spending your time, an incredibly valuable and movable resource with me today. I hope it's useful to you. So I will put up and welcome your questions.
So thank you so much, CA, for an incredibly rich and informative webinar. This has been great. And obviously people are really engaged. We have lots and lots of questions to discuss.
Great.
Just a quick reminder for people that there will be a recorded version of the webinar with the slides and the video with what you see on your screen now, available on the CBRC website under resources. So there was lots of rich detail in the webinar. If you want to go back and listen again, you certainly will have an opportunity to do that. And just to quickly tell people also that if you want to become more involved with CBRC in other ways, your institution or organization could become a member, or if you're an individual, you also could become a member. You could continue to join our future webinars, and we have a network map of researchers that you could put yourself on if you're a researcher. We could include your information in our newsletter, and if you want, you could sign up for the newsletter. So just to let you know that there are more pieces to CBRC as well. Now let's focus on the questions, because we can have an amazing discussion with CA. I'm going to turn off my camera so that you can focus on CA's voice and expertise, and I will just ask the questions without a camera. All right, so the first question, which is not the first question, but the first question I'll ask is, what have community partners gone on to do with the reports that students completed, and what have community partners found most useful about the research shop model or process?
Great question. I'm just writing some notes down to make sure I don't forget. So this is one of our questions, actually, and something that we are building in a process to follow up on. 6 months after projects are completed, do a phone call and a very brief, just 3-question essentially, but about how findings were used, from where they sit now, what would have been more useful to them, so that that can help sort of inform our scoping process for future projects, that we have a clearer idea of how to ask, how to get at what might be of the findings. And so it varies. So we don't have a structured process right now to collect all of that, but anecdotally, there are a few ways. So lots of partners use the research findings to apply for funding, to make a case to say, here's what the literature says, or we've done this completion and this program is needed because X, Y, Z, is a very common use. Some groups are using the reports to shape and develop new programming. So one we just completed was around mental health. So did quite a look at the literature around mental health, which is vast, growing very quickly, but sort of how, in this very specific way, how can mental health resources or tools most effective to address eating disorders. So the report was produced there, and the partner is looking at developing a project, like a platform essentially, and a tool to do exactly that. And so now we have all this research to help inform the shaping of that program. One other example that I'll offer, which was so interesting to me this past semester, was a community group that offers a range of programming, seniors, vulnerable seniors. Also, they do food bank. They also do some. They offer a daycare, and that they have lots of different funders where they have to report all kinds of different things to different funders, and so they collect data to report to the funders, but that the pieces of information, pieces of data that they report to their funders are sometimes not very detailed and not necessarily helping them to get a full understanding of what a challenge is. So an example would be you have to say, like, is there a housing issue? So there's a box that says housing, and if it gets ticked or it doesn't, but there's no way to say, what is the housing issue? And like, what is the particular circumstance this person finds themselves in? And so they asked for a team to redesign their data collection tool. So the students did interviews with staff members to get a sense of what's going to be usable for them, what they're hoping to collect, and develop this. I'm such a nerd. One of the most beautiful spreadsheets I've ever seen, to make it easy for workers as they're doing client intake to say, okay, here are the questions we want to have answers to, and then as we have contact with them, just a lot of drop-down menus so that it can be quick to collect, and then a lot of automatic summarizing of those things by topic, by month, by demographic group, and then by year, so that they still have the ability to draw their data out of that and report to funders about how their programs are going, but that also more for sort of referral and triage. What's going to be actually the best service or the best fit of a service that we offer in our organization, or what might be a better resource, a better fit for you in another organization. Really, like, that one excited me so much to really shape a data collection tool to be quick and easy for workers, but really to try to strengthen the impact that they can have in the folks that they support. So those are some examples. And so what's most useful just varies, really. It becomes something that gets shaped differently for every project.
Thank you, CA. That's great. There are a whole collection of questions around, I'm going to say loosely themed around accountability to the community, and several of them focus on the students themselves. So how do the students become connected with the research shop? How are they trained? How are they supervised? what does that look like? And it sounds to me like some of that is about how are we making sure that organizations are getting the best research possible.
For sure. Another fantastic question. Yeah, accountability to community is incredibly important. Part of what we try to do, or like one way that we tend to that, is that we use the memoranda of understanding to say these are the ambitions that we have of each other, and this is what we're kind of getting into. And then another way that we try to tend to that is that typically the team leads, which is just one person for each team, is the main contact for the community partner rather than a whole team of 4 or 5 people maybe. Each partner, we're going to be respectful of the community partner's time and just make it simple for them. Another piece I didn't mention is that we're now trying to build in a structured process where at the very least there's an initial meeting, at least the team lead, if not other team members and the partner. We do that now, but also a midpoint check-in and a follow-up at the end of the project. Sometimes those things happen, but it hasn't been consistent. But yeah, so to have those touch points as ways to check in about how it's going, if there are adjustments that need to be made. Yeah, so that's part of it. And then the team lead is typically a more senior undergraduate student or alum, but also typically somebody who's done at least one project as a research associate with a research shop already, so that they have a bit of experience with the ways that we do things, the ways that we approach things. In our orientation, we talk about the principles of community engagement that I mentioned a couple of times now. And then really in the method specific training that we do, we try to really just center the experience and center the experience of community members. And so yeah, it's really just a sort of humanizing, the goal is sort of humanizing each other and focusing on the benefits of community. Yeah, training is something that we're tending to and are formalizing more over time. And then supervision comes, the immediate comes from the team lead, but then the coordinator also offers a fair amount of supervision. Yeah, but that we sort of becomes a kind of, in some ways, a sort of barriered process where not all of the volunteers get access right away to the community partner. Or if we have a project that involves data collection with that may be more sensitive. So we had a project where folks were doing use with food bank users. And so we don't go through formal ethics, we don't go through an REB process, but we do have a good relationship with our ethics office. They are aware of the work that we do because most of our projects are essentially quality assurance or quality improvement evaluations of various kinds. They fall under the exception to the Tri-Council policy statement on ethics, but that we, can just have a conversation with ethics saying, this is the project that we're thinking of doing. What advice would you have for how to mitigate the risk? We will often, either Evan or I have stepped in to do more active supervision of some of those more sensitive cases. So yeah, those are some of the ways that we tend to it. But I also think, the accountability, the greater question of accountability to community is a really important one, and not one that I have clarity on how to do really yet. There may be benefit to having a sort of community advisory committee. So there are some ideas out there and sort of existing groups who are working on community engagement, working on sort of leadership of diverse voices that we're in conversation with to try to figure that out. So it's not a tidy or perhaps satisfying answer, but it's definitely something that's on our radar that we are trying to tend to as best we can.
Thank you, CA. That's fantastic to learn. And there are quite a few other questions which we don't have time for today. So I will ask you not to put you on the spot, but just ask you to think about if you would be open to, and we can have a conversation later, but think about if you would be open to maybe doing like a little mini interview or something and putting it as part of our newsletter so that we can engage with the rest of the questions?
Yeah, I don't even think about that. Absolutely, I'd love to.
Okay, that would be great. So
Great.
we will include that in our next newsletter, and then we make sure that we sort of honor the time that people have taken and the ways that people wanted to engage in this conversation. Thank you everyone for being here today, and thank you CA for sharing so much of your wisdom with us. We really appreciate it.
Wow, thanks for the opportunity, and any wisdom that you heard mostly comes from the amazing folks that are involved with this. I've really just come in to learn about it and think about it, yeah, from where I sit, but I feel like the richness that I can offer really is just drawing on the incredible work that the volunteers and staff people who have been working on this for years have brought to it, and the community partners. And yeah, so thank you, but the credit needs to be shared among hundreds of people.
Well, and thank you. And I think that's definitely right. The nature of community-based research is that we share that wisdom across and we build it up together. So thank you for focusing on that as well. We'll just ask people to take 2 minutes, literally 2 minutes, to share your feedback about the webinar. Certainly CA is interested in your thoughts, and so are we at CBRC. We want to continue to give webinars that are useful for the community and for universities because that's part of our commitment. So if you wouldn't mind taking 2 minutes to do that, that would be great. And thank you so much for participating. We will send out more information about our fall series of webinars when we have that information to share. So take care and have a really great day.
Thanks so much.